My name is Pete. Amazonia is a company that does communication strategies for different companies. I work with Maxime 2 days a week on a long-term basis, sometimes more depending on the project, and it meshes really well. These are some of the companies I worked for, some of them on the payroll, some of them as freelance projects. This is where Maxime and I almost met. This is where we work together on a long-term basis. By show of hands, who here is in marketing? All right, about 25%. But who communicates on behalf of the company? I would expect all hands to go up, right? Everybody's in marketing, everybody's in sales. There are no exceptions. And this is one of the first challenges. How do you make sure that your messaging, what you're telling customers, is used by everybody in the company consistently, the way it's intended? If you don't do that, people will start rolling their own, chaos ensues. The way messaging is built in a lot of companies is surprising. Like you walk in and you think this must be very scientific. With messaging, that's not really the case. I'm from a sales background, so it was all very binary. Either you close the deal, you don't close the deal, you make the money, you don't make the money. With messaging, it's like all over the map. What you see a lot is copy pasting. Find the biggest company in your category and just do what they do. Or just copy stuff that you like for no good reason. Second way it's created a lot is politics. Guy with a big title walks in, especially in corporate, and he goes, I demand that you put this in our messaging deck. People have an idea, because marketing is really cool. It's very easy. Anybody can do it. I'm pretty smart. I have good ideas. And it has high visibility, which means you're a target. People will try and insert their ideas or steal credit for your ideas. A lot of politics. What's missing is a clear process. Like, how do we create messaging and why? I learned very early on, as soon as I switched from sales to marketing, that you have to be able to defend your ideas very, very well if they're going to survive. So I said there must be a better way. I wanted a sound basis, something that I could defend and roll out to a bigger organization. And the solution is the brain. You may have contrary evidence, but everybody has one. And a lot of what's in the brain is the same. The wiring is pretty much the same for everybody. That wiring is what's there to keep you alive. There's parts from the back that regulates breathing, that regulates blood pressure, digestion, etc. So a lot of the circuits are there to keep you alive. A lot of circuits are there to make sure you can perceive things. If I do this, there's something really interesting happening. I see what's happening. That signal reaches my brain first, because it's all visual, it's all waves. The second signal that hits it is me feeling it, but it travels a longer distance, so it doesn't reach my brain at the same time. And the third is I hear the clicking, because mechanical energy has to be converted to electrical energy and it reaches my brain. So 3 signals reach my brain at different times, and my brain does something called binding, which is it puts those 3 things together and makes it one single experience. And the circuits are there because we evolved from this environment. And one of the key triggers is something makes a sound there. I need to understand, is this good for me? Can I eat it? Or can I mate with it? Or is this bad for me? Can it eat me? So whenever you see a new stimulus, a moving thing somewhere, all of a sudden your brain goes, oh, wait, I need to check this out. I need to give this a little more attention. Some of those are built in. They're called instincts. And some of the behaviors that you have that are instinctual can be extremely complex. The second one is a heuristic. Now, a heuristic is a way to arrive at a conclusion while minimizing the energy needed for it. You're taking a mental shortcut to ease the cognitive load and to reduce the number of calories you have to burn to come to a decision when you evaluate all the facts. Biases are worse. Biases are just flat wrong. They are a systematic departure from rationality. It's where you basically make the wrong conclusion consistently. And the brain is the hardware behind it. The mind is what the brain actually does. And the self is who you think you are. Ask any neuroscientist, and they'll tell you the self doesn't exist. There's no region in the brain where it can be found. There's no electrical activity to hint on where it is. It's an imagination. And the ego is basically what we think others think we are. Now, all 4 are important if you're building messaging, especially that last one, because often you're wrong. What other people think you are is not what you think you are. That includes customers in the market. There's a Canadian neurologist from the 50s that said neurons that fire together wire together. This is how some of these neural pathways are formed. The best way to compare it is footsteps in the snow. You've got a pristine snow layer, and the first person walks through them and they make a track. Second person comes along and has to decide, which path will I take? Statistically, the chances are slightly higher they will take the same path, the one that already has the footsteps. And if enough people do that, it becomes the accepted way from A to B. That's how you train your brain. It's called brain plasticity. Anybody here have kids? Young kids? You can see it happening in kids. When they reach for something and miss, nothing really happens. But when they reach for something and hit, and they grab it, statistically it becomes more likely for them to do that again. They're learning as they go along, and they're forming these pathways. The science that studies that is a failed marketing experiment because they can't even get an agreement on the name they want to use. Sometimes it's called brain science, neuroscience, cognitive science. The list goes on. I'm like, guys, pick a name, right? But there is a large body of research that is grouped in these disciplines that can be used for messaging. So brain science is an interdisciplinary field. It has biology, neurology, it's got psychology. There's a large body of research spanning over 100 years. So we saw somebody here say, well, I put people in a scanner. Right? I never put people in a scanner. I don't have to. The research is freely available, and there's thousands of papers of people that put other people in scanners. It starts with the earliest forms of psychoanalysis, when people began to understand in the 1800s that the brain worked in specific ways and they were predictable. Then it went on to Bernays. More on Bernays a little bit later. Then Vance Packard, the Hidden Persuaders, the Mad Men era, where he said, using lust is a very powerful trigger, but you can't really do that. So he wrote a book on that that exposed the techniques that were used by the advertising industry from the 50s and 60s. Up to today, where you've got functional MRIs. Functional MRIs, you stick your head in a machine and it can tell which parts of your brain are getting more blood flow, which parts are electrically more active. So there's a large body of reproducible research, thousands and thousands of papers that can be used to build better messaging. So neuroscience or brain science is the scientific discipline that looks at how we think, how we remember, and how we decide. 3 things you want to influence as a marketer. How do people think about us? How do people remember us? And how do they decide to do business with us or not? So extremely powerful stuff. That's all good news, and there's a lot of research that is available. These are some principles, a subset of what I use. There's about 250 of them in total, but this is just over 100. And each of these have a significant body of research behind it. Double-blind studies, statistical analysis. Can we use these in marketing? Of course we can. In fact, it's not the first time that people have come up with this idea. Do you know who the person on the left is? Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud, the inventor of psychoanalysis, said that everything is a repressed sexual urge. He also said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. The guy on the right, I guarantee you nobody here knows, but he's super important. His name is Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud. He lived in New York, and he went on vacation in Austria with his uncle and had long walks in the Alps and talked about psychoanalysis and the new insights that he gained on how the psyche really works. And then he wrote a book called The Engineering of Consent. How to use those early psychological insights for advertising and marketing. He became a big favorite in the advertising industry, a very highly paid consultant on Fifth Avenue in the 50s for the golden era of advertising. They would hire this guy for hundreds of thousands of dollars in those days to help manipulate public opinion. I'll give you an example. In the old days, I'm talking 30s, it was not done for women to smoke. Men, not a problem. The more male smokers there were, the better. But women, it was considered not very elegant. And the tobacco industry said, shit, that's a market we're not addressing. How can we address that market? And they had a campaign called Torches of Freedom. I kid you not. So he paid a number of young debutantes in the Easter parade in New York at a certain time to all light up a cigarette as a symbol of them emancipating. And this is the ad that ran. American intelligence has exploded the ridiculous theory that forced a stigma of inferiority upon a sex. Sales exploded. Once that happened, normal service was resumed. Don't eat so much candy. If you smoke, you won't get fat. Those torches of freedom fundamentally changed how the advertising industry looked at psychology. So, can we use all of them? Not really. There's a few like this one. We have a hard time individually recognizing people from another race than our own. Science shows it. In milliseconds, it takes us longer to do the individualization. Can you use that in marketing? Oh, hell no. Can you imagine? So some of them you cannot use. We ascribe fundamentally different characteristics to men and women. This is true. The science is clear. Man flu. Everybody agrees. Men react different to women when they get the flu. There's a scientific study that proves it. Can you use that in marketing today? It'd be tricky. This, old school car shows, remember those? Where you put young girls just to trigger emotions in men and then hope that some of those emotions would stick to the products that you were selling. Can you imagine using that today? It's just not done. So you have to be careful on what you use. It can go wrong very, very quickly. So you can't use all of them. That's the bad news. Good news is you can use most of them. There's a lot left. There's over 150 left that you can use. The issue is it's kind of a complex thing. You're looking at like 100 different principles. You have to know them, look at the research. It takes forever. So how could we simplify that? The way I've done it is with the 5 intents model. The 5 intents model is super simple. If you look at things like graphic design, there are certain laws there, contrast, typography, color, that dictate whether your design will work or not, whether it's appreciated, beautiful or not. With language, with concepts and ideas, you don't really have that. You've got grammar and spelling, but that's gonna tell you whether it's correct or not, whether it be encoded and decoded consistently. It doesn't tell you how effective it's going to be. All right, so we needed something like that for messaging. And what you can do, based on the research that we have, and the research which is freely available, you kind of organize it along why are you communicating. Whenever you do something, whenever you send an email, whenever you start a campaign, whenever you say something, whenever you open your mouth and do a pitch, you ask yourself, why am I doing this? What is my end goal? What am I trying to accomplish with this? If you don't have that, if you don't have a clear understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, you're basically doing random acts of marketing, sometimes also called brand awareness. Brand awareness is very, very important, but it's also a category where marketing lops in stuff that doesn't work. Oh, it's brand awareness. You have no results. Brand awareness. So why do you communicate? There's 5 basic reasons why you communicate in a B2B context. And I think it's valid for a B2C as well. I've used it mainly on B2B. There's 5 reasons. These are the reasons. You want to fascinate, educate, differentiate, validate, and motivate. And we'll go through all of those in a little more detail now. Let's look at the first one. Fascinate. The goal here is to get noticed. The goal here is for people to just give you 5 seconds to 15 seconds of their attention and not just scroll past you. For example, you fix a problem that they are aware of. That's the easy one, right? That's what they teach you in sales courses. Always ask a customer, like, what keeps you awake at night? And as a customer, you go like, oh, again, you're the specialist. You tell me how I can improve my business. Or fix a problem they're not aware of yet. Do you know you're at risk? That's how insurances get sold. Do you know you're at risk? What's going to happen to the people you love when you die? Life insurance. You destabilize the preferences because what you're doing, specifically in a B2B sale, is what you have in your pocket is a great idea, something that will revolutionize the world and make everything better. But what you're challenging is the way things are. We've always done it like this, and it works. I could save you $5 million in a year on your marketing budget. Yeah, but that's just going to mean I'm going to get less marketing budget next year. It's fine, don't touch it. And you trigger curiosity. It's a very, very powerful trigger. That's the one we saw in the steps, right? Something moves, can it eat me? So fascinate basically is the first step. It's for when people don't know you, you just get them to look at you for a little bit. The next step is to educate. Explain what you do in ways that are easy to remember, easy to recall, and very easy to understand. Describe how it works. Make sure you use outcome-based statements. Oh, we have an API. Great. If you then say, well, you can connect us to Salesforce with ease, that's an outcome-based statement that tells them why you have the API. You can onboard users for your trial. You can share best practices. You can show how to get the maximum benefit. How does it work? What's it going to do for you? Next, you differentiate. Now, differentiation is very important if somebody else is at the table, if there are competitors that are also pitching. This is how you show you're different better. It shows how your organization is better and different as well. Lots of culture, right? Showpad, unique culture, just as important as the product itself. Because the product itself exists from many other vendors, but people want to subscribe to the Showpad vision a little bit. You can compare it to others. You can contrast it to others. You create a preference here, and people will subscribe to who you are and what you do. People will subscribe not just to who you are and what you do, but also it will give them an identity. If there are technical differences, very important. If there are differences in the way you work as a company, super important. Validate is where you establish trust. Validate is, okay, you've got my attention, you've outlined a problem I have, I can see that you solve it. Why should I trust you? Anybody can say they can solve my problem. This is where you start to prove your claims. This is how you demonstrate how success will be measured. At the end of this, you'll be able to da-da-da. You'll be able to save X% of Y. It also shows you're a stable company. Challenge for a startup. If you're in a B2B startup, your customers may ask you at some point, how am I going to know that you're still here in 5 years? You could fold, you could run out of runway in 3 months, and I've just invested and I've got nothing, right? So that's very important. Show you're a stable company, show you've got runway, show you've got offices. For example, prove the ROI. Do an ROI calculation. Do a total cost of ownership calculation. If it's a subscription-based or a SaaS thing, show them the ease of termination. You don't like it? Monthly cancellation. All of a sudden, there's no risk anymore, and you've validated your offering. Analyst reports, really cool. And finally, motivate. Motivate are the classic sales techniques and tricks that you learn as a junior salesperson. Basically, put a knife on their throat and do not walk out without a signed order. You drive the bus on it. You don't say a customer goes like, oh, I'll think about it. No. What's the next step? When should I call you? Who can I talk to if you're not the right person? Drive the bus. Create urgency. Create scarcity. Create urgency. The offer is valid 3 days. Create scarcity. I've got 3 spots left on this seminar and you're done. You can see it when you're booking a hotel. Only 6 rooms left. That's scarcity. Fear of missing out. Also, show your process. Show what happens next. People are insecure about how to do business with you. Explain them. Like, okay, we'll sign the contract, then you get the first chat from the install engineer, and then customer success takes over. Step by step, you eliminate that fear and doubt and the uncertainty of what happens in the process, and you lower the starting barriers. So those are the 5 intents, and those 5 intents together form your communication DNA. So the 5 intents are easy. If you do nothing else, but ask yourself, whenever you create content or you do something like, what am I trying to do here? One of those 5. If you do nothing more, you've already got a big step forward. But you can go much further because all the intents are always there for everybody. So I've not seen any company that goes like, I don't really want to motivate. Like if a customer signs or not, I don't really care. You have multiple strategies per intent. If you want to fascinate, be new, be salient. Salient is relevant. Solve a problem, identify a problem. And then you've got tactics, actionable tactics. Per strategy, you've got a few, and all of those tactics are connected to a principle and a body of research. Some of them you will be able to use, some of them you won't. We talked about the ones that are just not usable because they're politically not correct. There's also others that are not working for you as a company. For Apple, for example, secrecy and mystery works really well. We didn't know a new computer came out until customers started calling us. Oh, the new MacBook Pro's out. Oh, really? I'm in the car. I didn't see the press release. We knew nothing. Works really well. For Showpad, doesn't work because Showpad has transparency in their core values. If you have transparency in your core value and you start keeping secrets, a very powerful trigger though, if you start keeping secrets, you've just violated your own principles. And this is also what typically is the deliverable. So when I engage with companies, we do this and we build a messaging framework that works like a menu. Starts with the 5 intents. What are the strategies? How exactly do I do them? Usually they're just a little paragraph, point, explanation, examples. And people use it like a menu. And what's cool is, once you've got that, anybody can create fantastic content. This becomes a living thing. What you don't want to do is deliver a content framework and walk away. It just dies somewhere. It's just another failed marketing experiment. But you want to keep this alive. Some things you'll retire, some things you'll add, and you manage it like you would a museum. You have your collection of things, and you make exhibitions. I pick out certain things, certain concepts, certain principles that I use for this quarter. Now, the 5 intents model does a lot of things in an organization. It standardizes communication about what you say and what you want to do. It helps founders clarify their vision. It's amazing how founders have a fantastic idea. They know the relevance, but they have a hard time conveying it to somebody who doesn't give a shit, which is the market. It aligns organizations. I'm going back on Friday to an existing customer to do a follow-up engagement after they've worked with it for about 6 months. And it's kind of fun because the whole organization is talking about content and strategy in the same way. You build better pitches. It can be used for sales enablement. Now, sales enablement is not something you just do internally. If you're in B2B sales, your sales enablement happens also at your customer. Because you're not selling to an individual, you're selling to a team. And some members of this team you will never even meet. But they need to be convinced of your offering. Not by you, but by your internal champion, the first person you talk to. So if they're a believer in what you say, you need to give them those other 5 intents to go to procurement, for example, and go validate. This is a great thing. We're not going to lose money. It's safe. Don't worry about it. You have to be able to go motivate. If we don't do it now, we're going to lose this deal in 3 days, right? This offer is going to expire. Also, content strategy, right? And this is where Maxime and I work together really well, is we think up a content strategy framework. That's for our quarter, and then that goes into the machine, right? So Maxime is the machine. He does the complex stuff of taking the content that we co-create and then making sure it gets to the right people and then measuring how far it got and capturing the response. If you do that in a very systematic way, it will help you a lot. And copywriting, that kind of seeps into every line of text that gets written. A simple model can transform how marketing is done, right? The light comes on in the entire organization. It goes all the way down to developers. So it changes the way things are discussed within an organization. It helps you build content. Let's talk about the customer journey. The customer journey exists in many different versions. It starts out with the customer being either blissfully unaware, I don't even know that I need you, or searching for a solution. The next step is they're interested. Right? The next step is they're looking at alternatives. Right? They're looking for your search term on Google to find other companies that do it. And if you start Googling, Google autocomplete will often do alternatives as an autocomplete word. Then it's decision time. They need to commit and make a decision. And then they're ready to buy. What do you do when somebody's blissfully unaware? You fascinate them. You trigger them to make sure that they're interested. Once they're interested, you tell them more. You tell them how everything works, what it looks like, what the results will be. When they're looking at difference, you show exactly how you are better, how you are different better than anything else in the market. When it's time to decide, you validate, you make sure that they trust you, you make sure that they won't burn their fingers. Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. Remember that slogan from the 70s? And then finally, you motivate. So that kind of shows you the mapping. It also shows you which kind of content to use at which point in the customer journey. In the beginning of the customer journey, do you really want to validate? Yeah, sometimes if you're a startup, you want to show some big logos to show that you're a real company, because otherwise people won't look at you. But mostly it's fascinate. Mostly it's getting people to notice you. Do you want to go, would you like to buy at your second touch point? Not really. So that gives you an idea of when to use what content. I'm not saying it's 100%. You can't do any of the others before you're finished with that one. But this is a really great tool to build like email nurturing tracks or lead nurturing tracks and stuff like that. Let's talk about the buyer archetypes. Buyer archetypes are not individuals. They're groups of individuals. Instead of going to the individual level, build an archetype, and a handful of archetypes should be okay. One tool I really like for building these archetypes is this one. Everybody knows this. I like the Dutch thing. And that split's important. The left part is about 16% of the population. But you can see where this is going, right? The difference here is the DRD47R gene. There is a genetic component that about 15 to 20%, 16% of the population has, and it's what's called a blunted dopamine receptor, also known as the wanderlust gene, sometimes called the cheating gene. Individuals with this gene, they need higher amounts of dopamine to be happy. So that means they do bigger things. They jump out of perfectly good airplanes. They have risky sexual behavior. They take a lot bigger risks. They don't mind suffering an inconvenience. They just want to feel alive. And they don't have the receptors that other people have to make them feel alive. So they need a little more adrenaline. They need a lot more dopamine, about 15 to 20% of the population. That's a very clear cutoff point. So I thought it was fascinating when I went back to the Rogers innovation curve, which dates back from the early 60s, and the recent DRD47 gene, to find that. So if you rename those categories, the innovators, the early adopters, etc., you rename them according to this. Let's start with the adventurer. The adventurer will be, right, he's always on to the next thing, has very short attention span, super curious, super intelligent, constantly pushing the envelope, going further. These are the people that bought the original Tesla. In those days, like what, 10 years ago now? That was stupid. You couldn't charge them anywhere. They would catch fire. They had a range of 6 kilometers, and the only thing they did was impress your friends. But they went from 0 to 100 in nothing, so it was really spectacular to drive one. So these guys always want the newest of the newest. They're not afraid to pay for it. It's not about what the thing does, right? It's about how it makes them feel. They're willing to suffer a major inconvenience for it, to be the first to do this and to have this. Quite often they're high on the corporate ladder. There is a positive correlation with risk-taking behavior and career advancement. The people that stick their neck out get the furthest. So if you're talking to an entrepreneur, for example, quite often it's one of these guys. Gadget freaks. And in the old model, they were called innovators. In the Rogers model, I call them the adventurers. And these are the people that you have to fascinate, right? These are people that always want the new stimulus. Next, you've got the believer. So the believer is not about what your offering does, but how it makes them look. First, it was how it makes them feel. Now it's how it makes them look. They want to be seen as innovators, but they've got kids and a mortgage and a house to pay off. So they're not taking the big risks, but they're taking some risks. And they will subscribe to you as a product because you will help define their identity. They want to belong to a tribe. They were called the early adopters. These are the people that now buy the Teslas. It's not about going from A to B. That problem was solved 100 years ago. It's about, what do I look like when I have a Tesla? I'm a successful entrepreneur and I'm still willing to suffer an inconvenience, but not as much as the first category. From then, it stops being about them. That's the cutoff point. Now it starts being about your product. The pragmatist has a problem, and he expects you to solve it. For example, I need to go from A to B. I want to find a solution to that. If you can solve that problem, we can do business. I will pick the most optimal solution. It's closest to what we know from economic theory as the theoretical Homo economicus, which is I maximize utility as a customer and I maximize profit as a producer. Very, very pragmatic, called the early majority. I like the pragmatist better than the early majority. One word and you kind of know what it's about, right? And what do they buy? The optimum thing. It's safe, gets them from A to B. It's fiscally very interesting because you're not paying any taxes on it for now. They don't really care about how it stimulates their feelings when they drive it. It's just a very comfortable, good thing. It just works. Next, you've got the skeptic. The skeptic doesn't believe you. The skeptic says, even if you can fix the problem, I don't really believe that it's the thing. These hybrids, I'm not sure the battery is going to deteriorate, and there's not enough charging points, and I can't park anywhere I like, and I got to change my network in my house, and They prefer to stick to proven technology. If it's not broke, just don't fix it. They fear regrets when they're making a decision. That's why they sometimes are non-committal and they stall through the sales process. And they were called the late majority. Again, I like the skeptic better than the late majority. They drive the Audi diesel. Proven technology, Euro 6, I can go anywhere. It's going to hold its value. So they're the more classic. And then you've got the resistors. Laggards are resistors. These are people that do not want to buy. They'll switch to electric when there is no more fuel to be had. When the pumps are dry, that's when they go to electric. Right? These are the people that bought a cell phone when they stopped selling the rotary phones and made a Bakelite. If there is no other option, they will change. So be careful when you spend your marketing budget here. They get comfort from the familiar, right? They get like, I'm okay. I know everything. I'm in my own environment. And I call them Newtonian sometimes. Newton's first law says a body at rest stays at rest unless you apply force to it. That's a skeptic. Unless you kick their ass, they're not moving. Or a body in motion at a constant velocity will remain in a straight line, blah, blah. So they will keep doing what they've always been doing unless a strong force acts upon it. Previously, they were called laggards. This is the guy that has his 1989 Porsche that's still fine. Hank Moody in Californication. It's fine. It's an old, shitty car, but it does, and I like it, so I don't want to change. Because any change is a risk of me not liking the next thing very much. So now that we know these archetypes, what do we do with them? And this is cool. This is, if you do this in a sales context, all of a sudden you know exactly what to say to which person. You're talking to accounting, you're talking to procurement, these two. You're talking to the owner, these two. You're talking to somebody who has operational responsibilities, educate them. So it's really cool to combine the old Rogers model and all those insights on brain science to this. So the key takeaways for this session is number one, be clear on your intent. Do you want to fascinate? Do you want to educate, differentiate, validate, or motivate? Number two, build an extensive library of concepts, ideas, and content. Statements, really small things that you can use, you can puzzle together like a menu. Curate that collection very, very carefully like a museum. Revisit it every quarter. Go back and say, is this still valid? Or have we developed new things that are more valid that we should add? And use the right concept at the right time in the customer journey. Start with fascination, end with motivation. Don't get them mixed up. Use the right intent with the right person. And above all, trust the science. There are thousands of studies that this stuff is based on that is freely available. Most of it on Wikipedia. Most of my research is Wikipedia. If you want to take this further, feel free to give me a shout. Happy to talk to you.